Hello everybody and welcome to this presentation of the Elder Scrolls lore. This time around we're going to discuss a race which, despite residing on another continent, has made a considerable impact on Tamriel's history. We're going to talk about the Tsaesci. Before we go into the historical significance of the Tsaesci on Tamriel, it's worth taking a brief tangent to go over their homeland, Akavir. Besides, we have so little in the way of official sources that this won't take long. Akavir lies to the east of Tamriel, across the Patamaic Ocean. In terms of geography, we have almost nothing to go on. The layout of Akavir has been left up to artistic interpretation. Naturally, there are many different variations out there. Personally, I think this one's probably the most accurate. At this point in time, though, we simply don't know. Akavir is host to a number of races. The Tong Mo live in a region called the Thousand Monkey Isles and are described as being monkey-like and very diverse in appearance. They are also said to be kind, brave, and simple. This may lead you to think that they're a primitive people, but in fact the Tong Mo are at least intelligent and well organized, based on the fact that they've successfully repelled numerous invasion attempts by their neighbors, the Tsaesci and the Snow Demons. The Snow Demons live in the region of Kamal, or Snow Hell. It's said that they hibernate, literally freezing during the wintertime. Then they thaw out in the summer and wreak havoc, mainly on the Tong Mo. Adasum Dir Kamal, king of the Snow Demons, once attempted to invade Morrowind, but was beaten back by the combined force of the Tribunal and the Underking. The name Akavir literally translates to Dragonland, so of course there were dragons at one time. There were two dragon races, red and black. The red dragons were enslaved by the Tsaesci. The black dragons fled to the land of Potun, home to a race of tiger-like cat people. A great war was waged between the Tsaesci and Potun, in the end leaving both nations severely weakened and all the dragons of Akavir dead. After the war, Tashraka, the reputedly divine ruler of Potun, resolved to turn himself into a dragon. It isn't known for sure whether this transformation was a physical one or just metaphorical. Either way, Tashraka succeeded. Those who claim the change was indeed physical describe Tashraka as the biggest dragon to have ever existed, with the coloring of a tiger. It might not be 100% supported, but that is just so awesome that it has to be true. We can reason that the nation entered a new era with the rise of Tashraka, as it became known as Ka Potun from then on. Tashraka has vowed to kill all the Tsaesci, and to follow that up with an invasion of Tamriel. As far as we know, nothing has come of that resolution, at least not yet. One last bit about Akavir that's worth mentioning is that at some point a native race of men lived there as well. However, they were enslaved and eventually wiped out by the Tsaesci. Which brings us to the main attraction. The Tsaesci are tall, golden-scaled, immortal snake men. Now, it's not agreed upon whether or not they're actually snake men. Some theorize that this part of their physiology grew out of legend, due to their infamy and the length of time it's been since anyone on Tamriel ever saw one. However, that is just so awesome that it has to be true. And one more thing, not only are they immortal, they're vampires. That race of humans that they destroyed, they ate them. Some even claim that they ate the red dragons rather than enslave them. At a time when the Cyrodiilic Empire was in its infancy, the Tsaesci invaded Tamriel. It's going to sound like I'm being vague here, but that's because even though this is a major event in Tamriel's history, we really don't know much about it in terms of details. A relatively small invasion force, over a short period of time and probably made up of human foot soldiers and Tsaesci officers, fought their way through northern Tamriel into the Geralt Mountains between Skyrim and Cyrodiil. The impending invaders gave Remen Cyrodiil the leverage he needed to merge the Colovian estate with his own kingdom, forming a new empire. Remen's forces halted the invaders at Pale Pass and cut off their supply line. It isn't said whether it was the result of surrender or retreat, but one way or another the Akaviri invaders were defeated. With the newly combined forces of two kingdoms now in his control, Remen Cyrodiil set his sights on the rest of Tamriel. In a move that was as brilliant as it was foolish, Remen pardoned all of the remaining Tsaesci on Tamriel, and appointed many of them to high-ranking advisory positions in the government and the military. Then, in an action which I believe to be reciprocal in nature, the Tsaesci proclaim that Remen Cyrodiil is dragonborn, and officially support his claim as Emperor of Cyrodiil. In less than 200 years, with no small amount of assistance from the Tsaesci, all of Tamriel was incorporated into the Cyrodiilic Empire. With the exception of Morrowind, that is, which isn't surprising considering it was under the protection of a trio of living gods at the time. Overall, the pardoning of the Tsaesci seemed to pay off rather well for the Cyrodiilic Empire. In the year 2920, in a complicated series of events, Emperor Remen Cyrodiil III and all of his heirs were killed. His Tsaesci advisor Versailles took power, becoming the imperial potentate and declaring the beginning of the Second Era. Under Versailles' leadership, the Second Era was one of utter turmoil. Unsurprisingly, there was quite a lot of resistance to the potentate's rule. In the course of crushing the rebellions, the treasury was left nearly empty, the Imperial Legion decimated, and many parts of the continent destroyed. Sometime later, the Tsaesci Denarius Ves suggested to Versailles the idea of establishing an order of warriors for hire, who could be employed by nobility in lieu of a standing army. They'd be hired on temporary contracts, and a portion of their fee would go to the potentate's government. The group would also only be composed of those native to Akavir. This would accomplish several things: bring order and stability to the areas that needed it, replenish the imperial treasury, and maintain an Akaviri military presence throughout the empire. Versailles promptly greenlit the idea, and the Sifim was born. It quickly became apparent, however, that detailed knowledge of the area was a necessity, and that the Tsaesci lacked that knowledge. Plus, there simply weren't enough Akaviri on Tamriel to get the job done, so the Sifim started admitting local warriors as well. Whether it was to satisfy a lust for adventure or a need for money, many young warriors joined up. The Sifim did good work and were a huge success, becoming known colloquially and later officially as the Fighters Guild. With the success of the Fighters Guild, the Potentate saw a massive opportunity to bring in more funds. He approved the Guilds Act and officially sanctioned the guilds of mages, cobblers, brewers, furriers, astrologers, and rat catchers, among many others. All guilds and all that would come to follow would be promoted and protected by the Empire, at a cost. Just 3 short years later, Versailles was killed by the Morag Tong, a legally sanctioned guild of assassins. Versailles' son, Severian Chorak, took his place, and was quick to outlaw the Morag Tong. Some of the Tong's former members would split off and found a new organization of assassins, one that would operate illegally in the shadows. A little over a century later, Severian Chorak was assassinated by the recently formed Dark Brotherhood. Nothing is known of the rest of the Tsaesci who resided on Tamriel during this period. However, based on the anger and utter hatred that the people felt towards the Tsaesci potentates, I think it's safe to assume that the rest of the Tsaesci on Tamriel were either hunted down and killed, or fled back to Akavir. Several hundred years later, well into the Third Era, after a long period of widespread open revolt, Emperor Uriel Septim V united the empire across all of Tamriel once again. He then wanted to place the focus of the empire on an outside enemy, and set his sights on Akavir. The invasion was extensively planned. The small island kingdom of Esroniet was taken to be used as a staging area, with the city of Black Harbor as the port. Years were spent on reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. The Far East Fleet, the largest fleet in the history of Tamriel, was formed specifically for the campaign. The fleet would be able to transport 4 legions to Akavir, along with Uriel V himself, with 2 additional legions to follow as reinforcements. The one thing they would lack is cavalry, but this would be made up for by a good number of battle mages, who could provide magical reconnaissance. Considering the information they had gathered and the preparations they'd taken, Uriel and his legion commanders agreed that the invasion would not meet strong opposition. It all seemed like a good idea at the time. At first, everything went exactly as planned. The Tsaesci were apparently taken by surprise, abandoning one of their coastal cities upon seeing the expeditionary force. The city was occupied by the invaders and renamed Septimia. 2 legions remained in the city to begin fortifying it and to make upgrades to its port in order to accommodate the Far East Fleet. The Emperor took the other 2 legions further inland. They then took control of the next city upriver, which had also been abandoned. This city was established as the Emperor's headquarters due to its strategic location and was renamed Ionith. The expeditionary force stopped their advance here and decided to dig in rather than press on. A road and guard outposts were built between the two cities, and envoys were dispatched to seek out the Tsaesci king, or whoever ruled the land. None of them returned. Meanwhile, rather than bringing in the reinforcements they had planned, the Emperor decided to use the fleet to bring colonists. Since the entire local population had abandoned the area, there was no one left to work the fields and provide a stable source of food for the legions. The colonists arrived just in time to start working the fields for a spring harvest. The fleet soon became ravaged by storms on their way back to Black Harbor. The storms continued throughout the entire winter, preventing the planned shipment of additional supplies. Winter was harsh for the two cities as well. The shortage of supplies and the addition of thousands of colonists put the legions on tight rations. Then, as if it couldn't be worse, they came under attack by Tsaesci raiders, which put a stop to any scouting or foraging. All of the outposts along the road were either captured or abandoned, cutting off all communication between the two cities except by magical means, which was a heavy strain on the battle mages. The harsh winter turned into a hot and dry spring. The crops failed, the river dried up, and the storms at sea continued. The desperately needed supply fleet pressed through to Akavir anyway and limped into Septimia, crippled and severely reduced. It wasn't enough. The Emperor sent them back for more provisions, this time accompanied by a large portion of his battle mages to protect them from the storms. It was at this point that the Imperial Council urged Uriel V to abandon his invasion. In a fateful decision, the Emperor refused. The few battle mages that remained were prioritized to the immediate needs of the Legion, and communication between Akavir and Tamriel became almost impossible. Therefore, we don't know everything that happened after this point. What we know next is that in the summer, the Emperor learned that the Tsaesci were massing an army to the north. He left each of the two cities with a small garrison and took the rest of his troops to launch a preemptive attack. They succeeded in routing the Tsaesci force and capturing their leader, but a Tsaesci counterattack forced them to fall back to Ionith. The simultaneous siege of both of the Imperial-occupied cities then immediately began. Thanks to the battle mages, the fleet made it safely back to Black Harbor, but the island of Isroniet was assaulted by the worst storms they had seen yet, and so the fleet was unable to bring reinforcements to Akavir. The next winter arrived, and the council lost all contact with the Emperor and urged the fleet to press on to Akavir despite the storms. Miraculously, they arrived safely, but what they found was disaster. Just 2 days prior, the Emperor led the legions at Ionith out of the city by night and made for Septimia. He planned to board the fleet and withdraw immediately upon their arrival. They broke through the Tsaesci lines, but were then surrounded by overwhelming forces. The Emperor led a heroic last stand with the 10th Legion. Later that night, 2 survivors of the 10th made it to Septimia, and reported that Emperor Uriel Septim V was dead. What little was left of the colony and the expeditionary force was evacuated. The Imperial invasion of Akavir was a complete failure. It was also the last time Akavir and Tamriel ever had contact with each other. And that's everything. We've gone over every aspect of Tamriel's history that involves the Tsaesci. It's been over 400 years since anyone on Tamriel laid eyes on one of the Snake Men. Over that time, Tamriel's fear and hatred of the Tsaesci has grown into legend and infamy. We need to remember that the Tsaesci are out there, as is the rest of Akavir for that matter. Not only are they extremely powerful, but they may just be looking to settle the score. A divided Tamriel would make for an easy target. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you on the next presentation of the Elder Scrolls lore.